A lot of recumbent riders and maybe velo riders in here? No? Yes? Yeah, okay, that's what I figured. So we may talk a little bit about that stuff as well. Let me put this up a little higher. There we go. So I started riding at a young age. Where do we go? There we are. That's me on the left at about 1977, getting ready to leave for our first bike tour. We had no panniers. We had a little bag in the back of the seat. I had a backpack, like a cotton army backpack with the cotton sleeping bag, and my mom gave us canned food to bring along, which if you ever want the best spaghetti you've ever had in your life, ride all day and then find out you can't camp where you were planning on camping, and then ride some more and find a field and build a fire, boil some water and make some spaghetti, and open that can of pasta sauce, and it was the best spaghetti you've ever had. If you get the cards, there's 2 cards. One of them is what if you crash cards, some things we'll talk about. The other is Ohio and Kentucky bike laws. I'm an Ohio lawyer. I have a friend of mine, Chris Carville. That's him down on the bottom of the Kentucky card. He and I tag team Ohio and Kentucky bike cases. I've done 500 crashes in Ohio, from traffic tickets to small cases to medium cases. We settled one for $2.25 million on a brain damage, very bad injury case just a couple of weeks ago. So we've kind of covered the gamut of things. In the bike world. Plus, I sit on the board of the Ohio Bicycle Federation, which has a little display out here. The Bike Federation looks at legal issues, looks at state law issues and policy issues, and tries to improve cycling from all of those perspectives, whether it's by changing laws or getting local, city, state, national governments to change policies to make things better for cycling. We work on all of those things. From about 1000 BC till the mid to late 1800s, not much changed. People walked around, or they had horses to pull them around. And then the bicycle was invented. This is one of the first bicycles that was created. It was very heavy, had wooden everything, nice leather seat, steering. Doesn't look that different from, a bike you'd have now. It's a few modifications down the road as came along. You had to be very well heeled to have this bike because A, it was very expensive, and B, your heels were your brakes. So you had to be well heeled to ride a bicycle in the early days. Since that time, a lot of different bicycle configurations came about. This one's called the Bone Shaker. Yeah, that way I don't scream. Oh, there's the trick. All right. Check 1, 2. Hey, how about that? All right. We had the Bone Shaker. The Velocipedes came up in many different flavors, big wheels, little wheels. People know why the big wheel was used? No. Well, you think about gearing on your bike, when you talk about a big gear, the gear ratio between the big and the little is what you're looking for. And with no chain and no gears, riding the big wheel in the front, and the pedals were attached to the wheel, so the pedals went around with the wheel. If you had a little wheel, the pedals would be spinning so fast. If you want to go fast, you're in one gear. You're just in a very big gear, depending on how big that wheel was. So the bigger the wheel, the faster you could go without having your feet go at 100 miles an hour around the circle. Those weren't the most effective. This was a Mr. Dunlop, who became known in the auto world, created the tires on this bike. There were early prototypes for the Dunlop bicycle tires. And then sometime around that 1880 time frame, we went from the penny farthing on the left to what they called the safety bike on the right. The wheels, you notice, there's no chain here. Now all of a sudden we have the cogs and the chain. This looks like something you'd buy, down the street today. It's got 2 wheels the same size, a seat, handlebars. There's a braking system, a chain, fenders, and they called that the safety bike. This tended to be male-dominated. Women were smarter. They said, this is stupid, it's dangerous. We're going to get on the safety bike. And once the safety bike came along, It was adopted by men, women, children. It became the thing of the 1880s. There were songs written about it. Politicians used the bicycle in their stuff. It changed culture. It made it easier for men and women to travel between the villages and cities in more rural areas to interact with each other. Socially, it was a game changer. It changed the clothing people wore, particularly for women. Women were arrested for some of these scandalous bloomers that they wore when they first started riding bikes, and I've got court cases involving Mrs. Noe's bloomers at one point in time. And bike touring also became popular back in that late 1880s time frame. In 1896, there's a famous effort by the Army using the Buffalo Soldiers, who were based out of Missoula, Montana. And they said, gee, I wonder if we can use these bicycle things in the military. And so they loaded this Buffalo Soldier troop, and they went 1,900 miles from Missoula to, I think, St. Louis, and figured out, we might be able to do this in the military world. I just put this in. This is one of my favorite pictures of all time. There's so much swagger in this picture. These guys are in Norway, at the top of some mountain looking out through additional mountains in 1898. And they're like, yeah, we did that. All right. This is an early picture of the Cincinnati Cycle Club, because in that 1880 time frame, a lot of stuff started happening in the bicycle world, both on the riding side and on the advocacy side. On the advocacy side, the League of American Wheelmen, as they were known then, now the League of American Bicyclists, was founded in 1880 by a bike guy and a law guy, and they both got together to found the League of American Wheelmen. That same year, clubs across the country were also founded, including the Cincinnati Club, which was founded in 1880. This bicycle phenomenon just scooped up into everything. People were riding all over the place. And of course, there's no laws in place at that point. And we found that out, I call a lesson in crashing. There was a Memorial Day in New York City. Thousands of riders were on the streets, and Cosmopolitan magazine decided it would be a good idea to have a car race through the streets of New York City. And so Henry Wells was driving his car in the race. He lost control. He ran into Evelyn Thomas's vehicle. Evelyn broke her leg. Henry was arrested. And, it was just another Monday in New York, I guess, except, as Paul Harvey used to say, the rest of the story, this crash happened Memorial Day in 1896. This was the first recorded auto crash in U.S. history. And Evelyn's vehicle was a Columbia bicycle, which was a high-end, Colnago or whatever of its day. It was one of the high-end bicycles that you could buy, probably $100 and something bucks back in the 1880s. Susan B. Anthony recognized how important the bicycle was for women. She says, I think the bicycle has done more to emancipate women than anything else in the world. It gives a woman a feeling of freedom and self-reliance. The moment she takes her seat, she knows she can't get into harm unless she gets off her bicycle, and away she goes, the picture of free, untrammeled womanhood. The New York Times, Henry Wells's crash made the New York Times, and if you go back and you're a little bit of a history buff and you search the archives of the New York Times for bicycles or velocipedes back in that 1880s, 1890s time frame, every day there's dozens of stories, because the bicycle was the thing that everybody was talking about in the society pages, in the now traffic and criminal and law pages and the court pages. And early bicycle advocacy started happening. So in 1895, another thing that happened was that this book came out, Road Rights and Liabilities of the Wheelman. And I happened to pick up a few years ago. This is a copy of that book from 1895. It's the first edition. And I pictured, if you're familiar with Brooks products, Brooks has been in business since that time frame, and they make this bag. And I always thought, I bet that's what they used to do. They used to put these little books in the bag and travel around with their law books if the lawyers were riding from court to court. But this is a book that cataloged all of the bike cases that had developed up through 1895. And you think, well, there may be one or two or three, but no, there were pages and pages of these cases. The author, George Burr Clemenson, he was a relative of the famous Burr from the Duels. He said, this book is devoted to the devotees of terrestrial flight in its most exhilarating form. I thought that's a great way to describe bicycling, terrestrial flight. So early bike law cases came out, and there's just pages and hundreds of bike law cases. And the issue, one of them was, can we use these contraptions on the road or not? Roads are for people and wagons, and courts unanimously said, no, these are conveyance devices. You can use your bicycle on the road. And case after case came out with that, and then they were organizing these cases into claims using the bicycles in the streets and villages, or liability issues relating to defective highways or crashes or things along those lines. In 1895, there was enough case law litigation that they could develop a book by that point. And there were some scofflaws back in the early days. Reckless riders were written up in the New York Times almost daily, people getting run over by bicycles. But by and large, cyclists had a good thing going. We organized, women's clubs organized, men's clubs organized, advertisers used the bicycle. This was the centerpiece of the Boston Globe from 1895. Advertisers and companies used the bicycle to sell their products. Artists painted the bicycle. And, it was generally a pretty fun thing to do. And that was why was cycling so popular? One word. Cycling is fun. We all know that because we get on the bike and we have a blast riding in the cities. That's my grandson on the left there. He's now 14 and like this tall, but And now you can ride from Cincinnati to Cleveland. You can take the bike trail. There's the Ohio to Erie Trail. We've got systems of trails throughout Ohio. But what I'm here to talk more about than trails is riding bikes on the road. What happened during the early days of bicycling that took us off the road? And one word again, cars. The car came along. I don't know if you can read this. This is from 1906 in Punch. It's the comic, the car and the bike have crashed. The cyclist says, "Why can't you look where you're going?" And the motorist said, "How the dickens could I when I didn't even know?" Because, as we know, cars can be very hazardous machines. This is from the 1930s and 1940s. If you Google car crashes, they started happening in big numbers, and they chased bicyclists off the road in a very organized way. The car became the king of the road, the king of policy decisions, the king of money spending on the roadways. It went to cars, not to bicycle riders. Roads became long and fast and straight, which encouraged fast car movement and created an atmosphere of crashing that we've just come to accept today. 40,000 people die every year on the roads around the United States. And we're just like, I guess that's what happens. And it doesn't have to be. That is a result of policy decisions that we made to favor speed over safety. Jaywalking. Are you familiar with the history of jaywalking? This is another great way that cars took over the roads. The roads used to be for people. People using roads, either walking, riding bikes, using horses, whatever. The car people wanted to kick people off the roads. And so they developed this idea of jaywalking. A jay, quote unquote, back in that era, in the 20s and 30s, a jay was a rube, a bumpkin, an idiot, a buffoon. And so a jaywalker was some idiot who was, lollygagging through the roads, getting hit by cars. And they portrayed him as kind of a goon-looking guy disobeying the police officer, walking in front of cars, getting hit. And it was criminalized to walk on the roadways. So what happens in the bike history? And the 60s came along. We've gone from the 1890s to the 1900s, the big bike boom. 1900s, a car comes along, kicks the bike off the road, and now we're back into the 50s and then into the 60s. And the 60s, man, they were good for bicycling, because the 60s we saw a big rise in the sale of bicycles kids got back into riding bikes. Eventually, and not too long, you can see the auto sales were outpaced by the bike sales a bit in the 50s, a bit more in the 60s, and by the time the 70s hit, the bicycle sales, were double or triple the sales of automobiles because the bike boom of the 60s and 70s was occurring. And then we had another big bike boom just a few years ago when COVID hit. People were not driving around and they weren't going anywhere in their cars, and the spending on bicycling became huge again. I have a tendency to talk a lot on the history, so I'm trying to pace through it so we can talk a little more about the legal stuff here in a minute. But I'm fascinated by this history because it tells us kind of where we came from, and it's part of the reason we're all here. The board of the Ohio Bike Federation, the Bike Federation's been around a long time as well, and we are looking at these historical things from a policy perspective and a legal perspective to say, how can we make things safer for bicycling? The basic, to me in Ohio, because I talk a lot about gloom and doom because I'm a lawyer, I get involved in things when things go south and people get hurt, but I'm also a math major back in the day. I got a math degree and I love the statistical side of this. And by and large, cycling in Ohio is very safe, especially when we compare it to other states. Ohio is a big bicycling state. We have a long history of cycling, going back to when these two guys named Orville and Wilbur had their bike shop, and they were making custom bike frames out of their bike shop in Dayton all the way through today. We have a long history of riding, the history of club riding. The other book that I fit in my little bag, this is the Handbook of the League of American Wheelmen Ohio Division, and it's dated from the 1890s as well. And if you open this book, every couple of pages, there is here's Claremont County, Clinton County. There's a map of each county. There is a summary of the good riding in the county, good restaurants, hotels that cater to bicycle riders. This is from 1890s. And again, I picture the Brooks guys, selling you a bag, and you put your maps in the bag, and you got on your bike, and you took off from Hamilton County, and you rode wherever you wanted. You could stop and look and see where the good roads in Claremont or Greene or Adams or Brown counties were, and you could ride around. And today, we have clubs all over the state. We're at one point, Ohio was one of the richest states for clubs and club riding and club rides. The calendar that the Ohio Bicycle Federation has put out every year has dozens and dozens of organized rides. It's the best product. I've been to a lot of national bike summits to see what other states do, and it's the best product for state riding that you can pick up anywhere for free. It lists every big ride. It tells you how to get there, who's in charge, and lists all the bike shops and all those kind of things. Because we have a safe place to ride. We have millions of riders riding hundreds of millions of miles in Ohio every year, and every once in a while there's something bad that happens, but statistically we are way below the national average of how these things happen. Ohio is the 7th largest state in the country, but from a safety perspective, our safety is well above the curve in terms of what happens. But we do that through, hopefully, folks following the laws. What does the law in Ohio say in terms of riding your bike or your velo or your recumbent on the roadway? Our mantra, same road, same rights, same rules. The key provision in the Ohio Revised Code says that these code sections, which are basically the traffic laws, apply or applicable to bicycles whenever a bicycle is operated on any highway or any path set aside for the exclusive use of bicycles. Like I can say, we don't have any of those. There's no path that is set aside for the exclusive use of bicycles. That was a dream of somebody who wrote that law, but we have multi-use paths, we have trails, but you might share them with babies and baby carriages, horses, runners. The 30-mile-an-hour guys might be training at one side while the kid on the big wheel is coming at you from the other side. So we don't have bike roads, so to speak. We have bike lanes on the road, but as we'll talk about in a minute, that's not even a feature of Ohio law. So We have a little weird system. The most important law, AFRAP. Does anyone know what that means? AFRAP means as far right as practicable. There's a law in Ohio, and it's uniform throughout the country that has some sort of FTR, far to the right, or AFRAP, as far right as practicable. The law says it's the only vehicle law that tells you where inside the lane you are supposed to be operating your vehicle. For the bicycle, it's Ohio Revised Code 451155, which says every person operating a bike on a roadway shall ride as near to the right side of the roadway as practicable, obeying all traffic rules, etc. So what does that mean? Yeah, go ahead.
What about potholes on
Yeah, no, that's
Can you avoid it?
that's the question, right? Well, for the first 50 years of its existence, this section here didn't exist, and this was the only thing we had. And from when I started handling bike cases in the 80s, we were dealing with that rule, and we tried to come up with a way to explain it to judges and jurors, and we said, well, the legislature had to impose some level of safety and reasonableness here. They would not have a law that required you to do something that was dangerous, unsafe, or unreasonable. So we argued that reasonableness and safety were elements of this, whatever this practicable meant. And the problem is, this word practicable is used in over 200 statutes in the Ohio Revised Code. It's as near to something as practicable, as long as practicable, as quickly as practicable. It's never defined. There's no definition in the code of what that word means. And so in 2006, the board of the Ohio Bicycle Federation was looking to do a big bike bill, which we put together, the Better Bicycling Bill. And we drafted changes to many different code sections, and we...
Well, I just want to comment that bill was signed right next door.
Yeah.
Over here, right here at the Greene County Fairgrounds.
This Chuck Smith is our president of the board. Yeah.
Bill of 2000.
Yeah. And one of the things we changed was adding this C section here. The C section, A section says, got to ride as far right as practicable. The C section, we incorporated these elements of safety and reasonableness. This section does not require a person operating a bicycle to ride at the edge of the roadway when it is unreasonable or unsafe to do so. In hindsight, I have heartburn about that sentence because it doesn't track the language here. What we should have said was, this section does not require a person operating a bicycle to ride as near to the right side of the roadway as practicable, as opposed to ride at the edge of the roadway, because that sort of implies that to do A correctly, you've got to ride at the edge. We've never felt that. So maybe we'll change that someday, Mr. Smith. Then we added our secret weapon here. Conditions that may require riding away from the edge include, when necessary to avoid fixed or moving objects, parked or moving vehicles, surface hazards, or if it is otherwise unsafe or impracticable to do so, including, this is the kicker, we thought, if the lane is too narrow for the bicycle and an overtaking vehicle to travel safely side by side within the lane. So the idea is that if that roadway is so narrow that a bike and a car can't sit next to each other safely, then that lane is too narrow to require you to ride off to the right. You should be able to take the lane, take whatever lane position you feel safe and reasonable to you. That's what we thought the law meant. That's what I've always argued that law meant since 2006. Had a case come up this year, right here in this county, in this city, where it went the other way, but we'll talk about that in a minute. So where can you ride? As near to the right side of the road as practicable, and that's State versus Stephen Sells. That's a case we handled a while back. The law also says you're allowed to ride two abreast. You're not allowed to ride more than two abreast in a single lane. So the law does specifically say two riders can be side by side within a lane. Before we had this change in the law, I used to argue that, well, if two riders can ride side by side and take up the lane, one rider ought to get at least half the lane, and then the other rider gets half the lane. There's no case law that said that, but that was the argument. I made the argument in the case in Xenia that I thought the law was too vague to be enforced. How do you know? How does an officer know how to enforce that law? How does a bike rider know if they're doing something illegal? To me, if there's a law that says you can't do this, whatever this is ought to be defined enough so you know if you're doing it or not. You know, I mean, it just makes sense. If you're riding down the road and the road is the lane is 10 feet wide, 12 feet wide, 15 feet wide, whatever it is, how do you know which channel is the magic channel that you're supposed to be riding in so you don't get a ticket? And so on the cross-examination now in these cases, I'll ask the officer, where's the magic line of practicability? Which of these lines is the right line that we're supposed to ride on so that you don't give me a ticket? Because the law doesn't tell us that. I don't know. You know, in the case here in Xenia, we had a velo rider who was riding in his velo in a outlying community, not in Xenia proper, and he was well into the lane. Let's say there was a 10-foot lane, because we went out and measured. It was 9 to 10 feet, and he was 7 or 8 feet into the lane, so he was probably a little left of center. He wasn't on the double yellow, but he wasn't on the white line. And the reason he explained at trial was the crown of the road kind of took him down. So if he got too far to the right, the whole thing was kind of leaning. So he wanted to be far enough in that he was visible and conspicuous and not leaning over off the crown of the road towards the right line. He got pulled over by the police for riding too far into the lane. The police officer didn't know the law. The police officer, and the reason we know this is because the body cam from the police officer, he pulls him over and he says, look, I just want to tell you this. You have to be within 3 feet of the white line. Well, this fellow knows the law, and not only knows the law, he knows it like a lawyer, knows it upside down and backwards, and had a card, had my card that had 451155C and probably memorized all of that. And he tried to tell the officer, no, I think you're wrong. That didn't go well. We need to spend about a half hour in cyclist police officer interaction so we can improve the way we chat with the officers in these situations. The officer didn't take to that very kindly. He said, I was just going to educate you on the law, but now I'm going to give you a ticket. Bang, gives him a ticket for riding not far enough to the right. We go to trial. I represented him. I get the officer on the stand. You'd agree that this lane is too narrow for your car and this velo to share side by side, right? And he said, yeah. He said, because you got to, no matter where you give him, let's say he's within the 3 feet of the white line where you think he ought to be. That's not the law, but that's what you think the law is. Let's put him over there. Then we have to add 3 feet because we have a 3-foot law in Ohio. So now we're 5 or 6 feet out. You don't have enough room in that lane to stick your police car, correct? And he said, yeah. And I thought, all right, we win. And the judge said, no, you lose. And so we lost that. So then we appealed that. And I filed my arguments and did all that. And I thought, okay, we win. And the Court of Appeal said, no, you lose, 2-1 against us. And, and they just basically said the trial court has some discretion in how it interprets the law. And so in the greater Xenia area, there is a court case that says if you're riding 5 or 6 feet in the lane in a 10-foot lane, you might run the risk of being ticketed. I'd love to try that case again, so if you get that ticket, let me know. How narrow is too narrow? This was one of our trial exhibits. There's a rider, Carrie Caffrey, who's also a graphic artist in Florida. She put this scale drawing together to show she gave the cyclist 30 or 40 inches on the side of the road. You start here with a minimum 3-foot clearance, and this truck can't fit into a 14-foot lane. In Florida, it's 14 foot is too narrow. You can't, it's defined as being too narrow in Florida. We don't have that in Ohio. I tried to get the court to adopt that in our case, but the court was not impressed. So again, this is a picture from the case that we took to trial, and this was one of the exhibits I used, asking the officer where he's supposed to ride. We've got cracks and things here. We've got the crown sloping. Clearly, traffic knows how to cross the center line and go around him. You know, the officer just got ticked off at the rider and gave him a ticket, and then you never know what's going to happen at that point. You're better off. There's a lot of prosecutorial discretion at the street level, so if you can engage the officer and walk away without a ticket, you're always better off. All right, so that's AFRAP. Question? Yeah.
So in my community, which is Kettering, there are markings that show, for example, at certain intersections, bike can have the middle of the lane, front left turns, and that sort of thing. So those are exceptions, yes? Is that legal? Or?
So that's a good question. Are they Shero markings, like just a painting of a bicycle, or are they in a green box, or how are they laid out? Do you know what a Shero? You know what a Shero is?
I don't, but it does have an emoji of a bicycle.
Yeah. Okay. So it's basically a screen print of a bicycle, kind of laid out there. Those are not recognized as a traffic control device in the Manual of Uniform Traffic Control Devices. I would argue if somebody got a ticket for being on top of that bicycle, I would certainly argue that the city's intent was to say, here's where the bicycles go. And you can't ticket me for being here because this is where they're telling us to go. In some places, they have a green bike lane that comes along the right, and then a big bike box painted in green in front of the traffic, which allows cyclists to filter up and then get in front of traffic at the light and go, rather than filtering up and staying off to the side. So sometimes we see those. I see a lot of those in Columbus more so than Southern Ohio. But to answer your question, there is no part of the Ohio Revised Code that uses bike lanes. There's no part of the Ohio Revised Code that talks about bike infrastructure, what the rules are in a bike lane, or anything like that. These are all creatures of municipal creation. So Columbus has done a lot of experimentation. They have one-way streets with two-way bike lanes, which is, I'm not a fan, but they're trying that out. They have different bike box configurations. They have bike lanes that are delineated by plastic dividers, and they have concrete dividers as well for delineating some protected bike lanes. We're seeing more of that in Cincinnati. Xenia is kind of the home of the bike trail, so we have bike trail intersections all over the place, which can get confusing too. I don't see the fellow who was, oh yeah, there you are. We have somebody who was riding on the bike trail, which is also the sidewalk, who ended up getting hit by a car coming out of McDonald's. So there's no law that says what the rules are for bike lanes on the roadway. That's part of the problem. Some cities create them in their city code, most do not. One thing you got to look at if you're riding in different cities, Ohio allows, we are a home rule state. And what that means is each little law-making burg, city, village, town, whatever, can pass their own laws and do their own thing as long as they don't conflict with state law on certain big things that are undefined. Very vague, but that's how it works. And you don't know which big things are things that can't be conflicted with until something happens and you file a lawsuit and you go to the state Supreme Court, and 6 years later the court says, oh yeah, you're not allowed to do that, or oh yeah, they are allowed to do that. And so each case is sort of a test case. In Hamilton County, where I am, in Cincinnati, there's 48 separate law-passing jurisdictions. Cuyahoga County up in Cleveland, there's 78 separate law-passing jurisdictions. Each has the opportunity to pass their own. Yes?
Yeah, I was going to mention that in that same law that we in the Ohio Bicycle Federation put together, you mentioned earlier that in 2006, we dealt with this issue and specifically stated that if any local ordinances conflict with the Ohio Revised Code, those ordinances cannot be enforced.
Right. So 451107 is what you're referring to, which is down here. 451107 talks about local traffic regulations, and it says these statutes here, basically the traffic laws, do not prevent local authorities from carrying out the following activities with respect to streets and highways. Number 8 says regulating the operation of bicycles. So what this says is that cities may regulate the operation of bicycles, provided that no such regulation shall be fundamentally inconsistent. That's the buzzwords that we chose to write in the statute when we revised it. So as long as no local regulation is fundamentally inconsistent with the uniform rules of the road, then they can pass their own laws. Also, no regulation shall prohibit the use of bicycles on any public street or highway, and that was a big one. There's 2 places in the Ohio Revised Code that say you can pass laws, but you can't kick bicycles off the road. A very common knee-jerk reaction, especially in smaller burgs. Something happens on the road, and it's like, okay, you're not allowed to ride your bikes during rush hour anymore, or you have to ride single file or whatever. This, in theory, prevents them from doing that. It doesn't prevent them from doing that, but if you get a ticket because you're on the road during one of these times when you're not supposed to be on the road, you can fight the ticket, cite these ordinances, and then probably end up in the Court of Appeals 2 years later and try to win your case. But there is good law that says they can't kick you off the road. So local listings say, yes, municipalities may still write laws, but local laws may not be fundamentally inconsistent with state traffic law. Here in Ohio, if you Google this phrase, safe riding regulations for bicycles, this phrase was something that somebody in a back room of a legal publisher came up with, safe riding regulations for bicycles, and they threw a bunch of crap on the paper and they sold it to 100 plus little burgs that needed a book of laws. And in this book of laws, you get your zoning laws and your housing regulation laws and your traffic laws. And buried in the traffic laws is this 1 page of safe riding regulations for bicycles. And it is pure, whatever you want to call it, BS poppycock. It's a thing we've been fighting for the last 20 years. I wrote a piece on it on our blog I call the stupid laws, because many of these safe riding regulations conflict with multiple state traffic laws. It was somebody who thought they were doing good by protecting bike riders and adding these ordinances in these little cities by the book, and they just pass them in a meeting. Bang, we're going to adopt these 300 pages of laws and include it in these safe riding laws, and they still exist all over the state. They have mandatory side path laws. If there's a sidewalk next to the road, if you're in a city that passed the stupid laws, you have to use the sidewalk. You're not allowed on the road. If there's a bike trail next to the road and this city passed the stupid law, you have to use the bike trail, not the road. A mandatory bell, mandatory audible signals when passing. This one always confused me. You must walk your bike through intersections. So I guess that means if you're on the road and you come to an intersection, you're supposed to go over to the crosswalk, walk across, get back on and go. I've never been able to figure that out. So, and all of these things are, not all of these, must give hand signals. That's pretty much something that we're allowed to do or not required to do. But all of these things are something that somebody came up with. They put it into this book that got sold to everybody. They all adopted them, and they're dotted all over the state. A lot down here in this area, a lot up in the Cleveland area, and all the little cities around there. All right, we got 15 minutes. So, for example, 4511-711 says, driving on a sidewalk, no person shall drive any vehicle other than a bicycle upon a sidewalk. Nothing in this section shall be construed as prohibiting local authorities from regulating the operation of bicycles within their jurisdiction, except no local authority may require that bicycles be operated on the sidewalk. That's what state law says. These stupid laws have these mandatory use the sidewalk rule. Yes? Yeah. Because a recumbent will take the whole. Yeah. Right. It's stupid. I mean, cyclists are more at risk on a sidewalk than the road. We know that statistically. It makes sense. If you think about it from an analytical way, anyone who's going more than 6 or 7 miles an hour is going to be safer on a road than on the sidewalk. You're at risk for every driveway, every business intersection, every crossing. You're going to you're going to be going faster than pedestrians on the sidewalk. So when a motorist is making a right turn on red, they're looking for someone at pedestrian speed, and you're 3 times farther away, charging in at 3 times the pedestrian speed. It's going to put you at risk. So yes, the short answer is, you see why the stupid laws are stupid, because they shouldn't be putting us on the sidewalk, and the law says they're not allowed to put us on the sidewalk, state law.
Sir,
Yes.
how about the roundabout? You have to go on the roundabout, you have to use the side roads over there. You go around there, you have to go around it, you have to be on the side road.
Is there a law that says then?
Yeah, you have to do on the side, because remember the roundabout, we have to go on sidewalk.
Not if you're on the roadway, no.
For different municipalities, yes, that is the case.
All right.
In Texas, you do.
Oh, okay. Not in Ohio. At least not unless they pass one of these dumb laws. In Ohio, you're allowed to be on the road, on every road that you want to, basically every road you would want to ride on, you're allowed to ride on, except for certain limited access highways and freeways. So the law says you cannot be kicked off the road. Cops will tell you otherwise. Cops will say, I want you over there, and then you get into a big battle over that. But roundabouts, I don't know if I put it in here, but I talk a lot about roundabouts because they present hazards for cyclists and pedestrians and disabled folks as well. So how do you fight the stupid laws? Well, here's what happened over here in Dayton, Ohio. Mr. Kane was riding his bike. Oh, question?
I just wanted to make a note that there is a difference between a roundabout and a traffic circle. They're different under the law.
Okay, tell me that because I don't know that.
Well, I'm from British Columbia, so it might.
Oh, okay.
But roundabouts are only on highways. Traffic circles are on municipal roads.
Oh, okay. We don't have many roundabouts that are on highways, what I would consider a highway, which is a bigger, wider, faster road. We have lots of roundabouts that are being constructed on typical suburban 2-lane or 4-lane, but mostly 2-lane roads that are just, instead of a 4-way stop or a 2-way stop or a traffic light, they're throwing a roundabout up. Statistically, it gets traffic through faster. Policy-wise, I don't know that should be the goal. The goal should be safety, and the safety is great for cars because they don't have to slow down, you don't get rear-ended. If you're on a bike, you're pushing a baby in a baby carriage, and all of a sudden you're now trying to figure out, how do I get through this thing? We have one in Columbus I had a case on that was the size of a football field. This roundabout had 2 lanes coming in from the bottom, 4 lanes coming in from the bottom, 2 in and 2 out, and 2 in and 2 out on the top, and 2 in from the side. And my guy came in from the side and was going around, and the traffic coming up from the bottom is going like 50 miles an hour. And the guy who slammed into my guy was looking way over there for big box-like things that could hit him and didn't see the bicyclist who was directly in front of him, who had the right of way, and just hit him and sent him into the next county, basically. And that's a fairly common problem in roundabouts for people that aren't in 2-ton motor vehicles. I'm sorry?
Did you prevail on that?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Yep. So in this case, and we'll get to it, just a few more things. In this case, Mr. Kane is riding his bike. The law in Ohio says lights on at sunset. So if it's after sunset, you're supposed to be riding your bike, driving your car with your lights on. Dayton, Ohio had passed a local ordinance that said, yeah, lights on at sunset, but if you're on a bike, you have an extra hour to put your lights on. You didn't have to have your lights on until an hour after sunset. Why they did that, I don't know. This crash happened at 30 minutes after sunset. Mr. Kane is riding. He doesn't have his lights on. He's on the right side of the road. A fire engine comes up and needs gas and turns into the gas station and just crunches him under the wheel. Here's a picture of the crash site. And so he sues the city of Dayton saying, hey, here I was, you guys were negligent, you ran over me. And the city of Dayton took a very odd position. They said, yeah, we passed that law that you had to have your lights on an hour later, but we really didn't have authority to do that because that conflicts with state law. And so we weren't allowed to pass a law that said bike riders don't have to have their lights on for an hour, because he didn't have a light on. The crash happened when it was still visible. It wasn't like pitch black in the middle of the night. It was 8:20, and the sun set at 8, so there's still light, and he's under the lighting ambient lighting of this big gas station. But that was their argument to get out of liability. Yes, we passed that law, but we didn't have the authority to do it, and therefore that law is invalid, and therefore we win. And the trial court smartly disagreed with that. The trial court said that, they said, yes, you're right, you don't have the authority to do that, but that's not going to be a defense to you in this case. And the trial court analyzed that under home rule analysis, which I won't bore you with because that'd be another hour and a half on the agenda, but basically said because traffic laws have to be uniform, we can't be willy-nilly changing traffic laws every mile or two when you go to a different city. Traffic laws are so important, the uniformity is important, and therefore home rule does not apply to allow the city of Dayton to change the laws. So Dayton is correct that they're not allowed to do that, and then they ended up resolving the case for big money after that nonetheless. So it was a different case because usually the cyclist is arguing the change in the law hurt me, where here the change in the law benefited him, and he was relying on it. But the court said no, they weren't allowed to do that. So we still have bike bans on the books. Here's one way that those things, the stupid laws, hurt you. In this case, my client was riding in Pickerington, Ohio. It's hard to see on here, but he got rear-ended by a 90-year-old motorist, broad daylight. He got clobbered, brain injury, big injuries, bad case. And the police report comes out, and we're looking for it, and it says, oh, Pickerington ordinance requires bicycles to be ridden on the sidewalk. There's a sidewalk along State Route 256. Travis was in the roadway and was therefore determined to be at fault in the crash. It's like, well, that doesn't ring right. And so we had a couple of options. I could have sued the city. We could have mazed a big ruckus. What I ended up doing was figured out who the city solicitor, the city attorney was. I called him up and I said, look, I think your law is invalid. I don't want to go through 3 years of litigation and force you to retain outside counsel and go up to the Supreme Court to win this. Why don't you just change the crash report and say, oh, by the way, the law is invalid, and that's what they ended up doing. So we saved thousands of dollars of legal expenses, and they changed the report to say, even though Pickerington ordinance says this, it is invalid because it conflicts with state law, and therefore Travis was not at fault. And because we knew State Farm, which was the insurance company, was going to use that and run to the bank and force us to jump through all kinds of hoops if we didn't get that changed. In Gates Mills, Ohio, which is up near Cleveland, you can ride around there and find these signs in a couple different spots. Bicyclists must ride single file. And that's because Gates Mills has the stupid laws that say, on these roads, you have to ride single file. It's not lawful. You're allowed to ride two abreast anywhere you want, but if you get a ticket there, I think we have a good argument, but the cops in Gates Mills, they'll shoo you off the road if you're riding two abreast. E-bikes. So what are the e-bike laws? Anybody have an e-bike? Yep, I do too. I've got mine. There's three classes of e-bikes. The e-bike people, the national e-bike people, approached all the states, tried to get them to adopt uniform e-bike laws. Most of them have three classes. Class 1 is a motor that'll drive you at 20 miles an hour while you're pedaling. Most bikes, I would say, are Class 1. Class 2 will drive you at 20 miles an hour like a motor scooter when you're not pedaling, but still, you still have the pedal when you're not using the motor. And a Class 3 will take you up to 28 miles an hour while you're pedaling. We have a 3-foot law in Ohio. There's a 4-year fight to add 22 words. It says, when a motor vehicle or trackless trolley, which we don't have, overtakes and passes a bicycle 3 feet or greater, is considered a safe passing distance. So since 2017, that's been the law, and that's been a very helpful provision for us. This was a billboard we created when the city of Cincinnati had a 3-foot law, but the state did not. You notice a lot of things here. We have a woman not kitted up and not on a fancy $10,000 racing bike. She's riding a bike, little basket. We've got a car passing her going over a double yellow. And I can't tell you how much consternation that caused because people started screaming, you can't go over a double yellow. And in fact, what they learned was, yes, for 10 years prior to this, because of the law we passed in 2006, changing the double yellow line law, you could pass a bicycle rider over a double yellow. And so we used this billboard to sort of emphasize that point. There's a question in the back. Yeah. Oop.
That's the simple way of asking the question. So what? There are 3 classes. So what?
So the 3 classes also are defined in terms of motor size. So number 1, if your motor's too big, it's an illegal vehicle. And if it doesn't fit one of these classes with one of these stickers, it may be an illegal vehicle. They can impound it, they can kick you off the road, they can charge you with driving a motor vehicle, and that kind of thing. And then the 28, the class 1 and 2 are generally, the general rule is you can ride class 1 or 2 on the trails, unless the trail people say they don't want e-bikes, but most trail people say okay. And the class 3 bikes, the general rule is you're not allowed to ride a class 3 on the trail unless the trail people say it is okay. So it's hard to tell when you're sitting there, is that a class 1, 2, or 3 when somebody zooms by you at 28 miles an hour? Yeah.
I'm from Michigan, and they just changed the law in Michigan. Class 1 can ride on any trail.
Okay.
Okay, Class 2 can ride on any trail with prior approval. In other words, they have to go in and show on handicap,
Oh, okay.
this, on that, and then they will give
Yeah.
it's a little thing that you can
Huh.
ride. If you can ride on anything, Class 3,
Nothing.
zip.
And that's, I think that was the intent. Yeah, go ahead.
E-bike, we set about 2,000 weights, depending upon the app.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Oh, yeah.
So how do you know, or how does a lawyer know in the case of an accident, whether it's set in class 1, class 2, or class 3, or is the assumption under the law that you're doing the maximum capability of your e-bike, which in my case, always rule class 3.
You look at the bike first and foremost, and you see what's on it. You look at the motor that's on it, see if it conforms with the because I left out all the definitional stuff relative to the e-bike motors in here. And then when it's a crash, generally we'd look at to see what you were doing. You know, were you on a class 3 or class 2, class 1? How fast were you going?
But how do you know in the case of most of the time, set it
I'm sorry, I couldn't hear you. Oh, it doesn't matter where it's set at. You could not be using it at all. You know what I mean?
If it has the ability to be a
Yeah.
class 3, then it's assumed to be a class 3.
If it has the ability to be a class, if it is labeled class 3, it's class 3. My e-bike is a class 1. It has 0, which I usually ride on because I don't use the motor. I can set it at 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and depending on how much juice I want to add. When I'm at 5, I turn that pedal and we're going 20 in no time. If I'm at 1, I can feel an assist. I'm doing all the work. I'm still getting a little push, but it's not pushing me to 20. I'm not going 0 to 20.
It always kicks out when you get 20. So
It's supposed to, yeah, that's the theory. I've never even pushed it that hard to test it, and we haven't had the e-bike cases we have, that hasn't come up yet. So a sharp insurance lawyer at some point is going to say, hey, let's look at this a little closer here and see what's going on. So we got 2 minutes. Let me zip through here. Let me get back to something else here. All right, so what if you crash? One of the things we look at in crashing, bad motorist behavior, which is we call the right hook, left cross, you get pinched off sometimes, and the classic rear ender. A left turning motorist can do a lot of damage in a hurry. This is a very bad case up in the Cleveland area. Dooring is another thing that we look for. Doorings are illegal in Ohio to open your door into traffic. In Cincinnati, they modified that specifically to include bicycle-related situations. And there's also bad cycling behavior that we look for. Sliding up next to cars. It may be legal, but it's potentially dangerous when you're sliding up next to cars at a red light. Now this first car is going to make a right turn while you're going straight. Salmon riding. People still to this day tell me, well, I was taught to ride against traffic. Well, that's stupid. You shouldn't do that because it's more dangerous and it's illegal. Failure to see, SEE, if you've ever taken a motorcycle training course, SEE is the acronym for survey, evaluate, execute. As you're riding your motorcycle, you look ahead 8 or 10 seconds, you survey the scene, evaluate what you need to do, and execute that early enough in the game so that you're not making last-minute jumps. A lot of cyclists wait till the last minute to start making their avoidance maneuvers. P to the third, sometimes P to the fourth, but we say poor prior planning and riding in the door zone. Not illegal, but potentially hazardous to you. All right, it's 12 o'clock. Let me see if anybody has any questions. I got another hour and I can talk, but go ahead.
In Wisconsin, several state trails say you cannot have an e-bike on them, but I don't recall if it's the law or the DOT, because they don't always agree.
Right.
But they say that if you have it off, any e-bike can be on any trail, even if they say you can't have one if it's off.
Right, if you're not, yeah, that makes sense.
So, I don't know.
Is that Ohio department?
Wisconsin.
Okay. Because in Ohio, in general, you can ride a 1 or 2, class 1, class 2, on any trail. I've been passed by 85-year-old little old ladies riding fat tire, sand bikes going 20 miles an hour as I'm trying to chug along. So, that's okay. I'm okay with that.
So when you read the DOT and it says something, and the law says something different, and then the DOT contradicts itself, we don't know really what to do sometimes. It's all over the map.
That's when you call your favorite bike lawyer and ask him, because I can't tell you about Wisconsin law. In Ohio, the trail owner would set the rules for the trail. So if they want to ban horseback riding, they can do that. If they want to ban big wheels or baby carriages, they can do that. They don't, but they have the power to set the rules. And we have hundreds of miles of trails. Each one is sort of owned separately by different groups, by state groups, county groups, by groups that band together, by private groups. And so all of that may come into play. So you just have to kind of look at what's the section that you're in, and what are the rules for that particular section. Other questions? Well, I got through at least half of my material, so. Yeah, yep, right here. Yep, absolutely. Pick one up.
Another question is, I've noticed when we ride, we just recently bought bikes to see if we become new riders, So we've been going the route from Eagle to Zinnia. And occasionally this guy comes by on I don't know, it's like a motorized gas dig bike. And he usually just comes up on you and goes by.
Yeah.
And I'm still trying to figure out, are they allowed on the trail?
In general, if whatever that thing is qualifies as a motor vehicle, which it might, or a moped. Yeah, okay, we're done here. Yeah, if it qualifies as a motor vehicle, the answer is no. And most motorized gas-powered devices would not be allowed on bike trails in Ohio. I've got a case now. I got a guy that got hit by 2 of them coming around a blind curve. And the problem is there's no insurance because the people on the motorbike don't have motorbike insurance for it. And so we're struggling now to get him compensated for injuries because there's insurance issues are bizarre. All right, well, thank you so much. I hope you're not sweating as much as I am, but